Hello, hello. Welcome, hey Jules. Welcome everybody to the Hilliard Art Museum for our first of four conversations centered around anti-racism in education. My name is Dr. Callie Smith, and I'm the educator here, and it is an absolute honor to welcome Professor Kiwana McClung as our first guest speaker. So each of these sessions will be kind of scaffolded around a similar framework. We'll begin with looking at a work of art, or a couple works of art in this case, chosen by the guest speaker. And then from there, we'll kind of follow with a conversation. So one thing that I just want to say a big thank you to all the faculty, and I see many of you in the audience, but especially to Kiwana. This really began at Rev Coffee Roasters. Has anyone else had a really great conversation at a Rev Coffee Roasters? Yeah, this is not a promotion, but it really did begin in June. Kiwana and I sat down, and we're just talking about a lot of things related to architecture and education. And this is one of the offshoots of that. So it is an absolute delight to welcome Kiwana McClung, who is Professor of Architecture, Chief Diversity Officer at UL, just fabulous all around in every space that she occupies. So please join me in welcoming Kiwana.
Thank you. It's awesome to be here, Callie. And I'm excited to extend our conversation out of Rev and to other people because I thought it was so dynamic. So I'm excited.
Yeah, so I wonder if you could begin by bringing some art into the space. So these are works that are on view that you can see. Since this is being filmed by Acadian Open Channel, it's best for us just to be located in one location. But these are actually on view. If you go to the next slide. Yeah, we're looking at two pieces today, one of which is the quilt by the elevator on your way up, and the other is in the South Arts exhibition. So Kiwana, can you tell us a little bit more about why these particular pieces caught your attention?
Oh, absolutely. So I came in and look at the art. I love looking at the art at Hilliard, by the way. It's such great work, and it's so evocative. But one of the first ones to get my attention was the quilt. It is Sarah Mary Taylor, and I love quilt. First off, quilting, I think, is something I grew up with as a tradition in my life. My grandmother, my husband's grandmother, actually, when I met her, she was just like, I'm gonna make you a quilt. She made me these quilts, and so it has always been a way that I have understood that we keep our family history, that women in our family bond. And so I'm always drawn to quilts. But this one I was drawn to because immediately, I understood what it was trying to say. And Sarah Mary Taylor might have a little bit of a different spin on it. But when I saw it, what I recognized is that it has all of these sort of figures on it. These figures are representative, in my mind, of Black women, right? And it's called Big Mama, which you could see in a lot of ways as being sort of a trope, right? That's attributed to Black women. But that trope has been kind of turned on its head by this work because of its ability to show all of those women as an individual by themselves in each, panel. And not only are they different, but they also are singular by themselves. So they're not caring for somebody. They're not positioned next to somebody else. They are just all thought of these women who share this experience out in the world and share these stereotypes and tropes, like they have to deal with that, but all have this individual, quality about them. And I think there's some pictures in here we could look a little bit closer and see that later on. I can show you that. But the other one I like because it brought together some interesting ideas. Well, it invoked in me some interesting ideas about architecture. I am an architect, by my training, and I teach about it. I'm a scholar as well. And we're always looking at materials and doing material testing. And when I saw it, that's what I saw. I saw material testing here, and I saw, innovation and experimenting with materials. And it was so interesting, the way that those things came together, where the fabric is stuck to the concrete, And then I looked later to see who had done the work and what they had said about it, and was not very surprised to realize that she was talking about the built-in environment, the permanence of some architectural materials and architecture versus the impermanence of sort of fabrics and textiles, right? And the ability to become frayed really quickly. And so those two caught my attention. Like I said, Sarah Mary Taylor and Big Mama, if you look at some of the detail, you notice that every woman is wearing something different. She's standing in a different way. And the way she's standing is almost celebratory. She's about to fly. She's about to dance, right? So I thought that was fantastic to see, because it showed that this woman was trying to show the individuality of those women, and they're not seen as a collective, even though the title evokes that idea of the collective. Well, we have to think of them as all of the same. But as you can see, some of them, are smiling. Some of them have eyebrows. Some of them don't. It's the differences, and then it's also the ways in which the stitching comes in. And Callie, that was very insightful that you brought that up earlier. The idea that the stitching shows up on some of them and it doesn't show up on some of them, and the way that this quilt came together was very individual for each panel. And so I think that is so evocative of the Black female experience. So this really incited my curiosity and got me thinking a little bit deeper. You can see some more images there.
And that's all 9 of the faces, just kind of zoomed in to see. Yeah.
Yeah, and I like how some of them look curious. Some of them look angry, right? Some of them look surprised. And I think that's the truth about what Black women are. They aren't just the angry one, right? So love that. And so here's this work, Crystal Gregory, and it's called The Articulation of Space, which was so great to me, to find out that she was inspired by architecture and space. But what I love about this one is this, right? The way in which the fabric meets the panels, right? These architectural panels, while still wet, got this fabric pressed into it. And now they are a part of it, right? And even if you were to remove the fabric and remove every single fiber, the imprint of that fabric is still in that concrete, and it's not going away unless you completely crush the concrete, right? And so that's something interesting to me, because it's so evocative of our country, right? We have a country in which we've made advancements and we've built up these really permanent things, but we also have this underlying, it's built into that permanence is these underlying cultures and histories and the people who actually brought that to life. And as much as people would try to remove all of the threads and remove that away, it's the imprint's still there. You can't hide it. You can't hide it when it comes to architecture. It has that kind of permanence. And it's something that I teach to my students all the time, the idea that architecture is not neutral. It is subject to the time and the context under which it was built. And we will embed within it our beliefs, our values, our histories. And so what does that mean when the consciousness or the beliefs or the values of society change? How do we wrestle with architectures that still holds those kinds of meanings? So I think that's very interesting. That's why I love this work. And it's beautiful. Definitely go down and check out that. And there are several other versions of the work that she has of different types of fabric pressed into the concrete. But I think it's all kind of, and I think it might bring out something different for you, but definitely that's what it brought out for me.
There's so many things to sort of unpack in your wonderful visual discussion and analysis of it, especially this idea of imprint and architecture, because that was really, when I reached out to you in June, it was about a specific structure.
Yes.
And, what do I do? I was newly appointed as the full-time educator. And if you look over there, what do you see? And I was like, what is this place? How do we talk about this place? And I was really seeking advice and guidance from Professor McClung about how to, this is an inherited object into our permanent collection. And part of my job here as a museum educator is to offer ways of accessing or interpreting or discussions surrounding objects. So what do you do when you inherit a replication of a plantation building by your museum? And Kiwana was incredibly helpful in sort of thinking about ways to use this space as a learning object, just like we do with other things on view in the museum. So I loved the question back in June that you said of, what can we learn from this place? What can we learn from the town building and other places like it? Because it's not the only building like that of its nature.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's so interesting, because it's a piece of architecture that was built. It's a replica of a plantation that was I can't remember the name of the plantation.
The Hermitage in Dara, Louisiana, like 2 hours from here.
Yes, so it's a replica plantation, but it was built in like the early 60s, kind of right around the civil rights movement, right? And that's so interesting to me because I don't think something like that would be built today, right? The idea, no, I'm saying
maybe it's like a personal residence. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe as a personal residence of somebody, of somebody's, but as what that was built as, I'm not sure if it would be, because today we understand those places as being very complicated places, that architecture was born of a very complicated time. And the thing that interests me about antebellum architecture specifically is how do we wrestle with these places that are very beautiful, but we're also places where very ugly things happen. And it's what the biggest conversation I've been having around them in the past is around the idea of people wanting to get married there, right? And when I talk to other African Americans, other people who are Black, who claim Blackness as their identity, they're like, no, like they're just like, they don't agree with people getting married at those places. And I think the reason behind it is what those places symbolize to them. They see them as really places that are really sacred, right? People live their whole lives and weren't able to live those places, and those lives were not great, in a lot of in so many different ways. And so, I think that when you start to think about places of trauma for people, right? Places that hold the traumas of people. In a lot of instances, we recognize that and we say, "Oh, that's a traumatic place. We're not gonna mess with that." But this is one that hasn't been, quite kind of wrestled with. So it was very interesting to think about the Hayes Townhouse from that perspective. I think that one of the things I've always wrestled with as a Black woman in architecture is the fact that I can enjoy the architecture and I can admit, that some of the architects that I follow, that I've learned about, have talent and have created great works that have shaped America and changed people's lives and still permeate our built environments today. But they are also very complicated people, and I don't agree with the things they believed. And I don't agree with the decisions that they made. And I think that this is one of them. Love A. Hayes Town, love his work, but why put that there? And then when I think about that time, I also think about the fact, well, what conversations were being had around the appropriateness of this? What people of color were standing up and saying, I don't think that should go there. And were they even consulted, right? It's a reason why I so lean into the ideas of community design and having as many perspectives as possible. That's something that came about during the late 70s. And I'm glad that it's here to stay because it gets those perspectives and it stops us from engaging in architectural practice that may be insensitive to others, that may value things that only are valuable to certain people and are represent trauma to others. But I think it being there could also be an important lesson for all of us, right? I don't begrudge its existence because it's getting us to talk right now. It got us to have a conversation. It got you to reach out to me. And that conversation led to us discussing how it could become a piece that teaches people, how it could become a place or an object that informs the public about the importance of perspective, the importance of understanding and acknowledging others' trauma, and how we connect, trauma, history, events to actual form, how those things get embedded in those forms. So I think that it's great that it's there, but I'm so intrigued by, sort of just the idea of building a place like that during, the 60s, when people were now starting to speak out about the leftovers from that period, the leftover social conditions from that time.
And one thing that came up in our conversation too was also this, there are many great little conversations we've had, but one of them that you're really driving home is this importance of context. Yes. And the frames in which we see the world. So you had a great quote you said to me the other day about,
everyone sees the world through a frame. And I think that that's true when we look around at the art in this museum. You aren't going to see everything about that artist's life in that artwork. You're not going to see their messy studio or their process. You're going to see what they want to show you, right? And what they want to show you is something in their experience that they think is valuable. And here it is for you to see, and they frame it. And even, a photographer, they will take pictures and frame it just right to get what they want. Right now, the gentlemen who are taping this, they planned out how this was going to be framed for the viewer's pleasure, right? And for them to see everything that's happening. And that is important. And I think the key is having as many frames as possible, right? Or widening our frame. Right? Every once in a while saying, let me not look at it in this way. Let me look at it like this, wide frame. Let me look through somebody else's frame, right? That allows us to understand the world a little better, understand other people's walk in their individual experience. And that's one of the things I love about art is that it's pointing me to something that I might not think about. It's giving me a lens to look through that I may not normally think is important to look through. And that practice helps me to grow. And I think that sometimes it makes you uncomfortable. Art makes you uncomfortable. Conversations about racism makes you uncomfortable. And I think that is healthy. We cannot grow without being uncomfortable. And I am always a proponent of that. Is that we have to lean into our discomfort. We have to lean into conversations and subject matter that really, make us freeze up. Because if we don't lean into them, we don't learn anything. We don't grow. We don't become new people. We don't understand where other people are coming from, and we repeat the same mistakes of the past. So this is why I stress the importance of frames. There's always this work. By Giorgio Di Chirico, where he has this painting where this girl is kind of like running through the street and there's like a shadow of a figure coming around the corner. And I use it to talk to my students about, the fact that, in a lot of ways, our cities are designed in that way. Our cities are designed in such a way where anything can come around the corner. But why? Why did we design them to have these little pockets where we feel unsafe? We have the power to design, and frame things around us in such a way where people feel safe, to be themselves, right? And be alone, where a woman can walk at night and not have to worry about something happening to her. And so I think that this is, a very similar conversation, right? We have to open up our frames. We have to think about the way we arrange our world so that people feel comfortable being themselves, that people are valued for being themselves, and that people feel safe being themselves.
No, thank you for all that. I was thinking about, the many spaces that you occupy as a creator, as an architect, as an educator, as a leader. I mean, you have so many different you wear so many different hats in any given day.
Oof.
So I was wondering, however you would like to take this, can you tell us a little bit about like your path to becoming an architect and how that grew into a professor? Because you practiced independently as an architect and then came into higher education and then are now serving as both a professor and the chief diversity officer. So walk us through a little bit of your journey.
Oh yeah, it's so interesting. Growing up, my family was always recognizing that I was in the art. I have a lot of family members who are connected to Southern University. They used to work there. They went to the university. So I was always exposed, definitely to Black art. In the house, my mom had Black art on the walls. It was important to her for me to see art that represents me and us. But I very early on wanted to create it. I was a very creative child. I always wanted the puzzles. I didn't want the dolls. I wanted the puzzles. I wanted the Lego sets. I wanted the art pads and the paint and the watercolor sets. And so I was very into that. But I also was just like this scientific, analytical kind of thinker. And so I didn't know what to do with that. But they just indulged me. Whatever I wanted to do, they were just like, here you go. Didn't have tons of money to get me involved in all types of things. Had an interest in music, but didn't have, money for lessons or anything like that. But the creative, the arts were something that I really felt called to. I will say that my first time realizing that maybe I could do something like architecture was in junior high. I had this teacher, and he was very interesting. He was a Black male, military man, and he was I think he might have been my first Black male teacher, and so it had to be around 6th grade that I met him. And but I had always gone to very diverse schools, so I loved that. But that was my first Black male teacher. And I remember taking this class, and he taught both art and math. And so I was like, oh, here's somebody that's kind of like me. And it was very interesting. But I remember when we would like say, oh, I can't do this math. He would be like, oh, my son could do that, my little toddler. And I thought he was playing until years later, I meet his son, and this kid's like 14 and he's in college. And I was just like, he wasn't lying.
You were being truthful.
He was being very truthful. But, he saw that my talent in art, he saw that, I was a good student and everything. And right around the time I got in 8th grade, he was just like, because my maiden name's Surf. So he's like, Surf, do you know what you want to do? Because you got a lot of talent. And I'm like, I don't know. And so he said, take your mom this letter. And just like, didn't even consult me. Just like,
did you open
bring
the
this letter. I didn't
you...
open the letter. I was a good child. I did not open the letter. But when my mom opened it, I'm like, what did he give you? And it basically was this letter saying that he had suggested to the school board that I was gifted and talented in art, that my mom needed to take me to the school board to get tested. I'm from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. So, at that time, the school system was undergoing a lot of change to boost the public schools. So there were a lot of programs, that were specific to the arts and architecture and medicine that were coming in as magnet programs into the schools. So my mom took me up there one Saturday. I'm like, why am I giving up my Saturday to go do this? But she took me up there. I took the test. They said, you're gifted and talented. They laid out for me all of these different programs at different schools and said, would you like to, you can go to pick one that you want to go to. I eventually picked Glen Oaks High School because it had both a medical magnet and an environmental and architectural design magnet program. At first I was thinking, most of the people in my family were nurses. So I was just like, well, I'm going to this one, try both of them and see which one fits. Mostly was taking the medical magnet classes, doing very well in them, but I was not challenged. I was talking in class. I was asking questions. They were frustrated with me. And then she started taking off points, every time I was talking in class. So finally I decided when I heard that I was not getting an A, I was like, this is unacceptable. What can I do? And she was like, you can do a project and get all those points back. So I built this little hospital
So again, like medical for your family,
yes,
nurses
yes,
and doctors.
yeah, nurses and all the people in the medical field in my family. I built this little hospital, and we had lights in it and everything. And my teacher, when I brought it to her, she's like, "Yeah, you get your points back, but I cannot let you continue in this program. You obviously don't belong here." And she took me to the other program director for environmental architectural design and said, "You need this girl in your program." And from there, it was just, it just like, okay, yeah, this is where I belong. Like, this is definitely me. Little did I know what I was getting into because it's one thing to realize that now I have something to focus my skill set around. But now I have to think about, why don't I see any architects that look like me? Why don't I see any architects that are women? Why do certain built environments looks one way and certain ones look another way? What's going on here? Like, all of a sudden I have all these more questions than I can provide answers to design problems. So that kind of got me started. I eventually decided to study architecture. It was a hard time because architecture is such an expensive major. No one in my family understood what it was, so they didn't understand it when I told them what I needed to get through that. I had no one to look to, but I was determined. And I think that a lot of my experiences just had me questioning the whole profession, but I still loved it. I still loved what I was learning, and I loved the practice of it. When I was in undergrad, my program actually lost accreditation. And so I had gone from one program, Louisiana Tech, that was fantastic program, but I did not like my experiences in terms of my identity, and how, certain people discussed things with me and talked to me, and the things that were said to me, that were identity based and not based on who I really was. And there was no understanding of what I was, or didn't care what I was capable of, just saw that I was this young Black girl, one of the few in their classes. And then I went to Southern University, which was, accepting of that identity, but had some real structural problems with their program. And so all of a sudden I'm seeing these two different problems, and I'm like, oh my God, how do you overcome something like that? They lost their accreditation, and I was very devastated, but I had already done my research and decided that I wanted to go to graduate school, and I knew that I could get a graduate degree in architecture. And so whatever I needed to get to graduate so I can go into an architecture school, I did it. I got into several schools. I eventually decided to stay in town, where I had the people to support me and the resources that I needed, and go to Louisiana State University, their School of Architecture, and met several transformational people there, but also realized that that this thing I was wrestling with wasn't going away no matter where I went. This two-ness that I was struggling with. So I got very involved at the state level and the local level with my local AIA and the NOMA Louisiana, that's the National Organization of Minority Architects. Got involved in really mentoring young architecture students, telling them to stick with it. And when the opportunity came for me to become an academic, I jumped at it and actually thought it was like a long shot, because I was just like, I don't know if I'll get this. But surprisingly, I got a tenure track position, and just kept going from there, and have been really about questioning and really finding ways to get my students to be more critical about our profession and why it seems to be so, it's not as diverse as we want it to be, why the conversation around diversity has been so, let's talk about it, but let's not change anything about the structures of what we do, how we educate, how we recruit, to make that change, to change that diversity. I think that, at a time when people weren't ready to do anything, I was like a radical person. But slowly over time, while I'm in the position, all of a sudden everybody's concerned with it. then George Floyd happens, and now everybody's concerned with it. And so what I'm doing and what I did becomes incredibly relevant now. And then I think that a lot of my engagement with our previous Chief Diversity Officer, Tanisha Austin O'Mallory, Dr. Mallory, I will bring her into my classes to talk about the gender neutral bathroom issue, to talk about other issues in the built environment related to diversity. And I think that those really prompted her to kind of say, hey, I'm leaving, but this is somebody that you can get to step in as Chief Diversity Officer. So it's been interesting because I'm doing this work now that at first I was a little bit hesitant about, but it's still so relevant to what I teach and what I believe in, and the work that the things that I'm trying to impart in people about the built environment, that I don't feel like I lost, anything by stepping away from the classroom, except for the pleasure of seeing all these great students produce work. And I still get the chance to see that work. But I very much am enjoying my journey. I think that I can find a single thread that ties together my journey so far in my professional life and in my understanding of the world and myself. And it has been my identity and how my identity fits within that tapestry.
I love that so much. And in that story you were telling, it kind of anticipated some of the other questions about educational experiences. Yes. And what you were saying is, that the one like military guy who was like, what was your last? Surf. Yes. You can, what do you, give this letter to your mom. Like that was right. A positive example of right. Someone really taking an interest, whereas it seems like, less positive examples at like Louisiana Tech or wherever yes. you were, like those were not good classroom environments, or they were not maybe as nurturing as they could be.
Oh, absolutely. I will definitely say they were not. Some of them were. I don't want you to think that my entire experience, has just been bad. I've had fantastic, teachers and professors over the years. One that was that I think that was the most memorable to me was in high school, joined this environmental and architectural design magnet program after the teacher's like, hey, you need to go here, and had to take a drafting class for the first time. My drafting teacher was this older German guy, but he's teaching in a high school filled with African-American kids. So I had a sense that this was a learning curve for him in a lot of ways. But he was very talented. He learned how to hand draft by hand. And then he very much stayed on top of the new advancements in like AutoCAD and technology. So in the computer, he could do all of that. But I was in this class with all guys. It's the only girl in a class full of guys, and we're all drafting and building models. He showed us, some basic model making skills. And I just kind of drafted circles around these guys, so I'm like ahead of the class, and I'm like putting them to shame. And I just have this really light touch with how I can draw, and I can get my line weights to show up right. And so my craft showed that I had a affinity for this. And so he acknowledged that. It was really great to have him acknowledge that. And then I remember maybe towards the early parts of my senior year, we had like a little discussion about what do we want to do when we grow up. And so I was like, I think I'm going to be an architect. And he straight up just told me, like, you'll never get out of architecture school. You'll never do it. You'll never, yeah. And like, if he had known me, he would know that I'm stubborn. So you telling me I can't do something? Oh, I'm definitely going to do it. But it was really like beyond that, I was really boggled by that. I was just like, why is this man even teaching here at the school filled with African-American students if he's telling his best student that they can never be an architect? Like, what are you doing? Like, I couldn't understand that kind of thought and why he would go there. Like, and why he wouldn't say, yeah, absolutely, you can do this. Like, what was his purpose? And it had me questioning his motives and everything. And then I decided to ask him about it, and he was just like, oh, architecture school, it's hard, and it's all these different things. And I was like, well, what about me makes you think that I can't handle something that's difficult? Like, I love a challenge. And he just was very dismissive, at the time. And so, it was interesting because he changed his whole tune by the end of that year. that year I was given a lot of leadership in the program, leading projects, going to conferences, giving presentations, and really came into myself. And we won this #1 award. We went to this conference in Little Rock, Arkansas, and we won this award, and I'm like all on display. And he kind of admitted to me, he's like, I think I made a mistake by telling you that you can do this. I've seen what you've done this year. And so it's really became full circle though later, which is why I am always open to people learning from, experiences like that. I think that writing people off because they make, comments or may do things like that based on some kind of ignorance or just not experience with knowing someone, from that background to do that thing. I don't hold that against them because of the fact that everyone can learn and things can come around full circle. My full circle moment with him was becoming a professor here at UL and joining our recruitment committee and saying, I think we should expand our recruitment into Baton Rouge. And realizing that there were people like me in those schools that I can recruit, to our architecture program. And then doing my research and realizing he's still teaching drafting courses. And so reaching out to him and saying, hey, do you remember me? I'm not saying any names because I don't want to cause anything, but I was like, do you remember me? And he's just like, of course I remember you, Kiwana. I was like, oh yeah, well, I'm coming to see if I can talk to your students about attending UL School of Architecture. And he was so on top of it. And I swear he was just like smiling like nobody's business when I came into his class. He's like, I taught this student and here she is, and she's working in the School of Architecture. She's worked on projects around the state. And that gave him a sense of legitimacy to his students that he was now teaching. But it also was kind of like for me, like, oh, look at how the table will come around. Very, very interesting. Another full circle moment, just kind of adjacent to that, was I had another drafting teacher the next year who was a Black man. Of course, he was very supportive. He taught me a lot. I actually got the chance to teach his son here at UL and everything. So the teacher, became a teacher to the next generation, his son. So I love those kind of full circle moments. And, me and that teacher are still pretty cool today. He actually retired a few years ago. But up until his retirement, we talked yearly, and anytime I see him, we always talk for a while. He wants to know what I'm up to and just express how proud he is of me.
Yeah. When before the session began, we were talking about, I was saying, we think of like anti-racism. It has so many components of like being uncomfortable, soul searching, thinking about the horrific legacies of oppression in its various forms. But there's also a lot of, I find, joy to be had in these conversations of, as you were saying, getting to know your students as whole people.
Yes.
And I love that what you said, because I think by pushing back with that certain teacher you were talking about and be like, hey, like, what about me? Like, do you know me? Like, yes. What about me is saying this? So you're really helping to prompt him to maybe think a little bit more. So can you say about maybe the importance of, looking at your students as whole people and what that really means for you as an educator, or like just say more about that idea? It's pretty straightforward, but maybe say more.
No, I think it's incredibly important that we see our students for all that they bring to the table. I refuse to think of them as empty vessels that need to be filled with knowledge, because I was not an empty vessel when I started, college. I very much had ideas about my place in the world and what I thought of the built environment and what I, thought of the world. But I was very hesitant to speak on those things because the idea, that are given by educators and professors, like that traditional education model is, hey, sit down and take notes and listen to what I got to tell you. I'm going to profess to you, and sometimes there would be things professed to me and I was just like, that's not my experience at all. Right. And I think that could lead a lot of students to feel like they have no connection to the content that you are given, right? Like if you are trying to get them to understand some content, but the way in which you are imparting that knowledge has nothing to do with their experience, speaks nothing to their individual walk, in this world, doesn't even interest them in any way, then how can you possibly be successful in imparting that knowledge, right? And so I have always been very interested in understanding my students. Actually, I don't even think I can properly teach them without understanding them. I make it a point to get to know a little bit about my students. And I notice there's a lot of professors on this campus that do the same. They'll have you submit a bio, or they're just like, let's talk a little bit to get to know each other first class, because then I know how to engage with them in such a way that could incite their curiosity, to get them to be more scholarly, to get them to critically think. And then I can learn from them. One of the beautiful things about kind of, being an educator is that I'm learning all the time, right? And there are students who have experiences that I can't even imagine. And, what kind of educator would I be if I didn't learn from that and learn from them, right? And I think too that a lot of what I can learn from my students, they tell me a little bit about themselves, can help me be more gracious in some of the things that they may do. Like I can't sit up here, and I won't sit up here and lie and say that every student has ever been nice to me and that no student has ever said anything racist towards me or done anything, racist, towards me. They have. I mean, from saying words to making memes about me, like just the most horrible stuff, making assumptions about my background and how I grew up. And then I find, though, that when I get to know students a little bit, I can kind of understand where they're coming from. Not necessarily that I agree with what they're saying, but I can say, oh, well, that explains a lot about why they feel this way about me. Maybe they never encountered anybody like me. They never engaged with anybody like me. And so I can give a little grace to that student and use that as a teachable moment, to say, listen, I think you have a misunderstanding about who I am, about who most people are, and you need to broaden your horizons, open up your frame a little bit more. And then it's also becomes a way for me to say, you have to be discerning about which spaces you can espouse these views, how to do it in such a way that you don't, make people, not necessarily make them uncomfortable, but hurt people, right? I think that it is healthy for people to say their opinions, right? But we should not be doing that with the intention of trying to hurt people, but just kind of get people to understand our perspectives. And so it becomes a teachable moment for me, a teaching opportunity about how to navigate life filled with people who are different from you, right? Which is what you will have to do. And to make sure that that's a strength. So when you get out there in the world and you have a client that's different from you, you can navigate that in a really visceral way. I love to tell my students about an architect, Paul Revere Williams. He was a Black architect. He was architect for the stars. So all of the stars who, minorities, he designed homes for them. But I remember he at one point had to learn how to draw upside down because he saw the way it would make his clients uncomfortable for him to sit next to them as a Black man. And so he learned how to do that. And I like to tell my students about that because they're just like, what? Uncomfortable, right? And I'm just like, I said, here's a man who made himself, who leaned into other people's discomfort to show that I have the ability and the chops to do this work for you and do a great job at it, right? But somebody's all uptight about having to sit next to him when he taught himself how to draw upside down. And I was like, and who do we remember? We remember him. We don't remember those clients, right? So it's this idea that even when you have negative interactions with people, even when you you don't like what somebody's, a student is saying when they come into the classroom. I want them to bring that. I want them to bring their whole selves, because somebody's going to learn from that. Somebody's going to grow from that. And I guarantee you, I'm going to be one of the people growing. Will you? And I challenge my students with that. Will you grow from this? Or are you going to stay static? Yeah.
No, that's wonderful. And I know we share a love of bell hooks. And
Yes.
I know many of you education majors will read bell hooks at some point.
Yes.
And I recommend all of the things, read all the things. But there's a point from teaching to transgress, which I think we both recently read. Every chapter, it's wonderful. And she really models ways of teaching in the way that the book is structured, which I think is so interesting. I know you are an expert in like built environments and writing too. Obviously, you've been part of book projects and many other things we haven't even mentioned. But she's really even changing the way that she uses language, like some a self-interview where she's interviewing herself, or some are just more straightforward chapters or interviews with other people. So since you just recently read it with me, or we read it separately, but we just happened to have read it. What have you gotten out of your most recent reading?
What I think this has come out of all of my readings of, I think probably read it like 3 or 4 times now, but all of my readings of Teaching to Transgress, really what always comes out for me is she's saying be vulnerable as the teacher, right? She's saying go into this looking for self-actualization, looking to be vulnerable, just being ready to be moved yourself, and not just it be about you moving something or advancing something or growing something in your students. And that's what I love about it. It's a very different relationship from what I always thought a teacher had with their students, right? Is that they're just this expert, imparting this knowledge, right? But I don't see it that way. If I'm not learning from the process, if I'm not growing from the process, if I'm not being vulnerable with you, how can I expect you to be vulnerable and put your work that represents you or something you worked hard of in front of me to be decimated, right? I don't feel comfortable doing that, right? And then I think also it's a process of, she talks about these, learning and teaching as a process of healing, right? And so all of the confusion that I felt as someone who was excited to jump into this new profession, really wanting to, be an architect, but then realizing that there's a lot about me and my personal identity that just doesn't align with this work. Like where do I fit? Where do I fit within all of this? And then realizing and reading Bell Hook's work is like, it's not necessarily about fit. It's about healing. This built environment hasn't been created necessarily for me to fit, and so, but how do you heal within that? And how do you train the next generation of designers so that they do create spaces that people fit within, right? How do you get them to recognize all of the people that don't fit and think about them, right? How do you get them to include those people in conversations about what the best built environment is, right? And so that became my teaching. It became the things that I write about. It became, the conversations that I have with my students. It became me allowing my students to bring the things, about their identity that they resonate with the most to the forefront and tell us how that, shapes their view of the built environment. And let's find common ground in that together, right? And so while I am learning, from or teaching my students, I'm learning from them. I'm learning about myself. I'm learning about, what kind of person I want to be, what kind of mark I want to leave on this world. I'm learning about what I know and how much I just don't know, which is a whole lot. I don't know a lot. And showing that vulnerability empowers them to do the same thing.
I love that so much. And I was even thinking back to the story you told of the teacher who said, "Oh, you won't be able to go to architecture school." I mean, vulnerability does not mean weakness. It is a beautiful strength. And in each time, and in these examples of the stories, you've had the confidence to then grow from it. Like you've
Yes.
opened yourself up to something. You opened yourself up to, there's a power imbalance, right? With that teacher you had.
Absolutely.
And you said, hey, well, what about me? Like that could
Right.
have backfired or have
Right.
been, but you opened yourself up to that and you won, you were in Little Rock with your
Right.
face on you won an
Right.
award for something.
Right.
So that I love what you're saying about vulnerability as being a strength.
Yeah, I think too, it's that a lot of people that think that situations like that have to turn and evolve into an argument. Like all of a sudden, I hate this person, I'm going to argue with you about how you're wrong. And like, I came from a family where my parents were just like, we don't just talk about it. We be about it. Like we do something, right? And so oftentimes you can't argue, your identity and how can you argue your identity? How can you argue your capability with somebody? How can you argue that? Like some of these things you can't argue, right? And I think a lot of times people want to throw around, hey, you're racist and blah. And me, I'm just like, no, I'm going to show you how you're wrong, right? I've always been a person of action. And so anytime that I was confronted with someone saying, something, and I mean, absolutely believing something that just is like so crazy to me, right? Black people can't do this, or our Black students can't hang, or, like every time I say that, I'm just like, to argue with the person is pointless because everything in their experience, their frame is telling them this, right? They are not going to change their frame anytime soon, right? Why would they, right? Why would you do that? And so I'm not going to argue. Going to show you, right? And then when I show you, that Black students can do this, when I provide the evidence in students succeeding and graduating and going on to have great jobs and being competitive, then it's just like your whole world is shaking. You have to reevaluate because the evidence is there. So I think that that's the thing. I think that oftentimes gets in the way. Things kind of devolve into an argument. And I am a debater, but I am not argumentative. Like when someone goes off about how they feel and if they're really strong in those beliefs, I'm like, okay, yeah, you believe that, and if they want to hear my point, I will give it to them, but I'm not going to argue because the proof is in what I can show you. People are and I think that's also just a natural, sort of evolution of my relationship with architecture is that evidence. It's evidence of people lived, of what people believed, of what people did with their lives, of what people valued. It's the evidence of that. And that evidence, you can't take it away as much as you would try to tell me that, these things didn't happen or that didn't happen. I'm like, well, why does this exist? And it exists with all the stuff that tells you that it happened, right? So that evidence that's provided by a built environment, by a built object, I feel the same is to combat these ideas of inferiority or superiority over certain people and all of that. You got to provide evidence of it. And even within that evidence, you're going to have some people who are convinced, that that's not the case. And those are just people that you can't argue with anyway, because they can never be convinced. But I think evidence is the key.
I love that. And vulnerability doesn't mean you have to just open up to everyone all the time.
No.
Like you,
No.
like you're saying, you don't have to argue with them if it's not worth your time.
Right.
I show them, like spend your energy with doing what you want to do and grow.
Yeah, no, I think that I never think about, like, I definitely don't want to look stupid to my students, but I never sit around thinking, I don't want to make any mistakes. I need to be over prepared, or anything like that. I find that when I'm genuine, and I bring to the conversation something, that I actually am truly interested in, that's where we get somewhere, rather than I've studied all that I can study about this thing, right? I also find that when someone brings something to my attention that may be counter to my beliefs, I wouldn't want to understand it. Not so that I can counter it, but so that I can see, well, what is it about this that someone's tying themselves to it? And maybe I'm missing something. And oftentimes I find that it cements, you know, my understanding of myself, because I realize, oh yeah, I can understand why this person has their views. Like these things, you know, our frames shape how we see the world, how we engage with the world, right? And I, when faced with something that's might be different from what I believe, my inclination is not just to say, I don't trust that, or I trust this over that. I want to really know, and I really want to understand, because that understanding may be something that helps me and changes me, or it may be something that just helps me understand the other person. Either way, there's understanding to be gained. So that's kind of my relationship with vulnerability is I have to allow myself to show openness if I want to get openness. I can't be effective in getting people to see these different perspectives if I don't allow my perspective to be seen, if I don't allow, you know, my shortcomings and my biases and all of those things to also become a part of the conversation.
We are sadly approaching 4:30, but I do want to leave a moment. I know I'm going to be, fortunately, these are being recorded and we'll have access to that because I need to go back and like hit pause, reflect. You've said so many wonderful things. But I do want to open the floor for a few questions if people have them. Are you okay?
Yeah,
okay,
absolutely.
Awesome. Yeah.
Absolutely open to that.
Do we have any questions?
Yes. Uh-huh. We've been having conversations about that. Like, how can that building become a rostrum for being anti-racist and talking about hard topics, right, related to race and racism and ethnicity in our history. And so I don't know, Callie, what y'all have planned for it, but I'm excited about the possibilities. I know we've talked about installations. We're talking about it just hosting events. We've had those kind of discussions, but I'm thinking that that's what the Hilliard is trying to discover, is how that building could be more than just this monument to a time from the past, right? And be more of a teaching tool that can help us move forward.
We're slowly doing something with it today.
Oh,
right? No, I mean, like we're reimagining, like the ideas around it. I think, I mean, physically, yes, we have a lot of dreams for that space, I think. But even like you're going to be working on a desegregation exhibition, thinking about the history of UL. In 1954, it was desegregated. So that's going to be forthcoming, hopefully. So yeah, we have big dreams for what that building can be. We'll continue to
definitely have some ideas.
Thank you, Joel.
Thank you for that question. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am. For first year educators. Oh, God. Yeah, so I think that one thing that I would say, and I'm thinking back on my first year kind of as an educator, my first time being in the classroom, is just learn as much as you can, right? Learn as much as you can, but also don't be afraid to bring your knowledge and your perspective into the situation as well. You have something, every one of you have something valuable to bring into the classroom, into the world. You know, like it's like, I think the world would be boring if everybody just did what this older person told them to do, right? Like, so I think that you all have perspectives, like especially, you know, a lot of you who are going to be first year teachers, you have a completely different perspective from me when I was a first year, you know, educator, right? Like the world is different. Like social media is like so big now. You have so many more tools in your repertoire to reach and teach students. And like, you should, like, that's a strength. You should grab onto those things and use them in whatever ways that you can to engage your students. I am not one of those people who was resistant to change or to technology or, you know, to doing things differently, because I really feel that the world's going to move on without me, even if I was, right? These things are going to keep going. And so always figure out ways to be relevant and authentic and bring yourself to the forefront, but always be willing to learn too. The things that people have already experienced are so valuable to helping you navigate the world. So you can learn a lot from them about the things that you're going to face, about the things that you're going to have to go through. But you can also teach them a lot about the things that they may, may not be as tangible to them or not as understandable to them. You can use those things and use those tools to reach the new generations. So that would be my advice.
I think we will call it there. I want to be respectful of the hour and everyone's time, but thank you again. Please join me in thanking Kiwana for a wonderful time.
Thank you all. This is awesome. This is awesome. And I hope this series continues with the same. I know for y'all, I see for y'all here, she's one of the future ones.
Yes, our next week, actually.
Yes, so I'm looking forward to coming and seeing what Faryal has to say and hearing her perspective on these same kind of topics. So it's going to be awesome.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.